fall of Gnomeregan, 25 years after the Dark Portal. Throughout the Third War, the savage Trogs had besieged the gnomes of Gnomeregan. Over time, the gnomes had slowly lost ground in their own home. Clever solutions could not solve the problem of the Trogs' overwhelming numbers. They eventually dug around the gnomes' defenses and breached Gnomeregan's engineering quarters. Not only did this cut off the gnomes from their best inventions, but it also placed unstable materials and machines into the hands of creatures that could not understand how dangerous they were. It was only a matter of time before a mistake would lead to a wholesale destruction of the city. The gifted engineer Sicko Thermoplug proposed a solution: bathe the overrun sections of Gnomeregan in lethal radiation. The gnomes would take shelter and wait out the Trogs to die. It was a brutal, desperate ploy, but it seemed as if it might work. The gnomes' leader, High Tinker Gelbin Mechatork, eventually agreed to the plan. It seemed better than waiting for an inevitable disaster to destroy the city. Unfortunately, Thermoplug had ulterior motives. He envied Mechatork's position and prestige, and he wanted to use the war to seize both for himself. Thermoplug also chafed at how the gnomes never used their inventions to expand the power of their nation. A failing he laid squarely at Mechatork's feet. Mechatork learned the truth only when Thermoplug's bomb irradiated the Trogs and most of the gnomes. In a matter of days, nearly 80% of the gnomish race perished. The survivors had no choice but to evacuate their own city. Thermoplug was left behind, trapped in the horror he had wrought. The dwarves of Ironforge took in the refugees, and the gnomes created a small home for themselves inside the mountain, called the Tinker Town. The future for the gnomes was uncertain, and opinions was divided over what to do next. Some gnomes argued that they would focus all their attention and resources on reclaiming Gnomeregan as soon as possible. Mechatork did not agree. Though he did plan on eventually returning to the capital, he believed the gnomes had more immediate obligations to the Alliance. The Third War had decimated the faction, and the gnomes' allies needed all the help they could get to survive the days ahead. Mechatork urged his people to research new technologies that would bolster the Alliance. In his mind, the fate of the Alliance and the gnomes were intertwined. If the faction crumbled, Gelbin Mechatork and his people would never have the support they needed to restore Gnomeregan to what it once was. The Lost King. After the Third War, the balance of power among the human kingdoms shifted. Lordaeron was in ruins, and the nations of Gilneas and Kul Tiras had isolated themselves. In their place, Stormwind arose as a new bastion of leadership and military might in the Alliance. This granted the kingdom immense prestige and influence on the world stage, but it also made it a target. The Black Dragonflight still desired to crush the last remnants of Alliance power in the Eastern Kingdoms, but they wanted to do so quietly. Onyxia, in the guise of a noblewoman named Katrana Prester, had devoted herself to weakening Stormwind. She had enlisted the help of the Defias Brotherhood, a group of human rebels who opposed the kingdom's nobility. The Defias learned that King Varian Brynn was sailing to Theramore on a diplomatic mission. She wove a dark ritual to sunder Varian's spirit, stripping away the traits that would allow him to defy her: his strength, his stubborn resolve, his unyielding will. She intended to destroy this half of Varian, leaving a malleable shell that would appear to be a charming, regal king, who would serve blindly as her puppet. Before Onyxia could destroy the embodiment of Varian's will and strength, he escaped her grasp and plunged into the sea. The waves swallowed him whole, and darkness closed in around him. Varian later regained consciousness at the distant shores of Kalimdor. Onyxia's spell had left his mind in tatters. He had no memory of what she had done to him. He could not even recall his own name. In the days to come, he would wander the world with no notion that he was supposed to be a king. Onyxia was furious that this half of Varian had escaped, but her plans had not entirely fallen into ruin. She would eventually return to Stormwind with her puppet king, but only once she was sure he would serve as her unquestioning servant. In the interim, the people of Stormwind agonized over Varian's disappearance. Many feared he had been killed. Varian's young son, Anduin Wrynn, was crowned king. The legendary paladin Bolvar Fordragon was named Regent Lord to handle the day-to-day duties of administrating the kingdom until the child was older. Neither Bolvar nor Anduin believed that Varian had died, and they never lost hope that they would see him again. Champions arise. The troubles of the world were multiplying at a rapid pace. The armistice between the Alliance and the Horde was tenuous at best. Major battles gradually erupted in strategic locations like Alterac Valley, Warsong Gulch, and Aratha Basin, bringing the two factions closer to all-out war. Of greater concern were threats from outside the Horde and the Alliance. In Mulgore, the Torrent dealt with encroaching bands of primitive creatures called Quilboar. In Elwyn Forest, human villages were besieged by kobold thieves and diseased wildlife. In Durotar, Centaur warbands plotted to take over the outlying Orcish lands. The crisis seemed endless. On every continent, in every nation, in every region, chaos was spreading, threatening to become catastrophe. What the Horde and the Alliance did not realize was that this explosion of disorder was partially the work of the old gods. The entities were subtly fanning the flames of conflict to weaken the world's nations. If left unchecked, those small sparks would have spread to ignite a roaring wildfire of destruction. But they never had a chance to spread. It was not the legendary heroes of past wars who rose up to fight for their world. It was the ordinary citizens of Azeroth who intervened. They began their journeys for different reasons. Some fought for adventure, or for the noble cause of justice. Some fought for vengeance, and to join the war against a hated faction. Some even fought for money, and looked for ways to profit from the conflicts. Still, others fought for glory, so that their names would be remembered by the entire world. And some traveled alone, while others formed mighty guilds that worked together to fight against the darkness. As the years passed, these extraordinary champions would be called upon to do the impossible. Without them, Azeroth would surely have succumbed to evil. The Suffering of the Dark Irons. More than 2 centuries ago, the sorcerer Thane of the Dark Iron Dwarves clan condemned his people to enslavement when he summoned Ragnaros the Firelord back to Azeroth. The violent eruption killed many and formed a volcano that became known as the Black Rock Mountain. The surviving Dark Irons carved out a stronghold in the depths called Shadowforge City. For generations, they were forced to serve Ragnaros and his lieutenants. The Wildhammer and the Bronzebeard Dwarf clans were unable to save their distant cousins, nor were they inclined to do so. The Dark Irons had earned their fate by launching a war of aggression against the other dwarves. Now, they had to live with the consequences. Emperor Dagran Thorison, a descendant of the long-dead sorcerer Thane, now ruled the Dark Irons on behalf of the Firelord. A charismatic but hard leader, he bristled at the servitude but delighted in the power Ragnaros had bestowed on him. When Ragnaros ordered Dagran to prepare the Dark Irons for a new war, the Emperor was overjoyed. He had long dreamed of conquering the other dwarf clans, not only to rule over them, but to wield their combined power in order to break free from the Firelord's control. His first act of aggression was kidnapping Princess Moira Bronzebeard, the daughter of Ironforge's king, Magni Bronzebeard. He had intended to use her as a hostage of last resort once the war began. He believed that Magni would do anything to protect his daughter's life, and thus would never consider any assault on Blackrock Mountain that would put her in harm's way. Dagran was surprised to find that he fell in love with her. Moira had a sharp wit and a strong will, and she was not intimidated in the slightest by her predicament. The two dwarves began to speak at length about their hopes for the future. Moira was the rightful heir of Ironforge, yet her father had never believed that a woman could rule as well as a man. Dagran confided in her that he wanted to free his people from enslavement, and he was willing to do anything to achieve that. In a few short months, Moira and Dagran joined together in marriage. King Magni could hardly believe the rumors that his daughter had willingly married an enemy. He recruited a covert team of Alliance champions to infiltrate the Dark Iron stronghold to rescue Moira. The Alliance team cut their way through Shadowforge City until they reached the Imperial seat. The ensuing battle shook the mountain, but in the end, Emperor Dagran Thoresen was slain. Much to the surprise of the Alliance infiltrators, Moira Bronzebeard was furious. She refused their offer of rescue and announced that she was pregnant with Dagran Thoresen's child. She had come to believe in Dagran's plan to free the Dark Irons. She intended to carry on his work without him. The Molten Core. To honor her husband's memory, Moira Thoresen put aside her anger at his death. The strike on Shadowforge City left her clan in absolute chaos, and for the moment, that was an advantage. Ragnaros's lieutenants were deeply suspicious of how loyal the wife of Dagran Thoresen would be to the Fire Lord, but they were too busy trying to re-establish control over the Dark Irons to keep a close eye on her. She used the opportunity well. Moira quietly let out the word that the Dark Iron dwarves were being forced to create a massive army for the Fire Lord. Dagran Thoresen's death had delayed the creation of that army, but not for long. Ragnaros and his forces would only become stronger as the time went on. To draw as much attention as possible, Moira made sure the rest of the world knew that there were riches and artifacts of untold power hidden deep within the mountain. She hoped that some adventurous or greedy heroes would band together to shatter Ragnaros' defenses and banish the Fire Lord back to the elemental plane. Her plan worked better than she could ever have dreamed. Before the Alliance and the Horde acted on the rumors, another force did. The Hadraxian Waterlords, elementals being of water who were natural enemies of the fire elementals. They offered aid and rewards to anyone who would challenge Ragnaros. Before long, the Waterlords had recruited scores of powerful champions to invade Ragnaros' domain in the heart of the mountain, the Molten Core. They carefully moved through the fiery stronghold, engaging and killing the greatest of these fire elementals. As the Molten Core's defenders fell, the champions used the gifts of the Waterlords to destroy Ragnaros' protective runes, leaving no barrier between them and the Fire Lord. Ragnaros' strength was legendary, but it was not enough to slaughter the invaders. In defeat, he was banished back to the elemental plane. The Dark Iron dwarves were finally free. Any among them who had doubted Moira's intention begged for her forgiveness. As the widow of Emperor Dagran Thoresen, she had always had a right to rule them. As their liberator, she now had their loyalty. But her victory did not mean that times would be easy for the Dark Irons, nor did it mean that Moira Thoresen had given up on her husband's dream of conquest.